Alright, now that we're back, basically what I'm going to do is I've got my little stand over there set up with all kinds of, I got eyepieces, my Sony, which I'm filming with the Sony, so I already got it set up in the tripod, so now I can't use it to adapt to the telescope, but I think you'll get the idea of it anyway. I've got an eyepiece, the feathering rings, and all this stuff. As we combine all these things and stick it on the scope, it all adds weight. And the kind of the thing that that you gotta kind of think about in the back of your mind is you want to maintain a good balance point where you're not overloading your motors, which I don't know that you really can. You'd have to have this thing pretty bad out of balance to overload the motors, I think. But but still you're relying on your clutches and things like that, and you want to find a good medium balance point, not one where the scope is just absolutely just where the breeze can just kind of make the gear play and give you some slop. I play with this thing and I don't see where I'll ever have a situation where the gear slop in it will affect anything. I've never had it that balanced to start with. And the one thing that I did run into is it's very easy to get it over balanced whenever you start changing things out and adding stuff on and putting the camera in and everything else. So basically I'm going to do just a little quick show on how to what it should look like when this thing is balanced, when it's pretty much in a good balanced area, and what it should feel like. And then as we start adding things on, what you need to do to kind of compensate for those things, and some little tricks that you can do to kind of figure out how to get this thing balanced back in. Take the cap off because we're not going to be using the scope with the cap on. So we're nothing more than caps off. We don't even have an eyepiece in. We've got our counterweight set up. We're going to release the clutches. We're going to do just a normal balance. Just normally just take the scope, get it pretty close. You can see I'm a little mirror heavy with no eyepiece in, and I'm also a little counterbalance heavy, which there's not really much anything wrong with that. We're not going to ever use the scope without an eyepiece, so that is pretty good. The thing I was playing with earlier is you want to be able to take just one finger on each hand and be able to just equally apply pressure and just make that scope move. See, even though we're a little mirror heavy, it's not enough where it's going to overdo your motors or anything. Same thing with the deal. And you look for the balance point. See, like right there, that's a pretty good balance point. It's just like right there. So you know that you're pretty close. But now you can see I'm gonna have to start really pressing to really get this thing to slew out to like almost a 90-degree area. So that's what you got to watch. As you can see, when your finger starts to bend, that's when you're starting to put too much pressure on. You really probably ought to start thinking about rebalancing. See, and it's funny because you can go one way, you can go to the right side, and it doesn't take anything, which is what my guy was talking about on ManCave, or excuse me, on Astronomy shed. Right now, the way I'm standing with the tripod, I'm at the rear of it, so right is east and left is west. So right now that's not a whole lot of pressure. We're actually heavier on the west side, and you can also see that when we go to this side, the mirror is actually the heavier side. And I think that's got to do with the clutches, just the friction in the clutches makes it do that. But anyway, enough of that. You get the idea. And it's still pretty good in balance. You know, you can see it. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot to move it, and that's what you want. You don't want, when you release that clutch, this thing goes flying over one way or the other. So we're gonna take our eyepiece, go and put our eyepiece in, which this is just the Bader 17mm Iberian. I think that's how you say it. Anyway, and you can see now. You can see how much better the scope is in line as far as balancing goes. You know, it doesn't take hardly anything to slew the scope. And when we get to this, like I said, this left side, it gets where it's a little mirror heavy, and it's a little counterbalance heavy on this side. But you know, like I said, it's still not bad. But I've noticed it's a lot more freewheeling over on the right side if you're standing at the rear of the mount. You know, it definitely doesn't take anywhere near as much. So one thing that I did do, and the other thing you also need to take into consideration while you're playing around with your balancing, like normally the tube, the operating tube assembly, the OTA. Normally, you know, I've got this thing with the cover on it. I've got the plug in the quick lock and whatnot. Of course, I've got the focuser racked all the way in, so I don't catch the focuser on the door hinge or, you know, moving the thing around. I don't have, you know, 6 inches of focuser stuck out there. You want to, just like we did in the collimation, you want to have your focuser racked about midway, if not maybe just a little bit more than midway out, because now that I've racked my focuser out, scope side's heavy. It's not, I mean, it does, you know, as you lengthen that focuser, it moves that weight farther out, which is just like taking a ruler and sliding it on your finger, and one side gets heavier than the other, and you know, and whatnot. The one thing that I did notice is see, we're still mirror heavy. I'd like to know why it does that, but it's not bad. I mean, it's nothing that the motor can't compensate for or control. But I'd like to know why it's heavier on one side than the other, because like when I swing it this way, just by you know, it balances out good. But it's like when I'm, see, like right now I'm sitting at that T shape parallel to the floor. When I swing to this side, I swear I'm not. You can see I mean, it takes a lot to get it back in the T shape this way. And it stays, but I swear I think it's the clutch, the way the clutches are made, the way that they're made, and the way they rub against each other. I think that's got to be what it is, because that's the only thing that's common between the two directions. But anyway, enough about that. Just one of those little overthinking things. But anyway, as you move your focuser out, you extend your weight out, so you actually off balance. And you know, it's just like if you go to the doctor, or like when you were in school, you always had to go get weighed for whatever, or anything else. You see the little slide scales. As you move the little weight, it tips the scale. Well, that's kind of the same principle that happens here. You know, and you want to find a good happy medium, kind of where you've got some weight pressing on the motor to where you don't have that perfectly free play, which that changes every time you move the focuser or you change an eyepiece or anything else. So I kind of go with about the middle rack setting on the focuser, and you can see I've got it pretty well balanced out. I mean, just just one finger and you can stop it. One finger doesn't take anything to get it going. To turn it, and you can see that as you move this thing around, the balance changes. And I think that's partly because of the pieces that are made into it, and everything else. But anyway, now that we've got this thing fairly well balanced out, and we've got our turning ring, the one thing that I did want to tell y'all is the thing I noticed the most, and the thing that gave me the most fits, was if I had the focuser to the left or to the right, it really changed the balance. Like, I would really get off-sided. Like if the scope was slewed to the left side and the scope was up and the focuser was stuck out to the left side, where I can stand over here and be nice and easy viewing, you know, it really changed the weight of the scope. And I mean, and sometimes, especially when we start getting in, I use nothing but 2-inch eyepieces. You know, these baiters are, you know, 1.25 inch, but they also have a 2-inch sleeve. So, you know, they are still fairly large and heavy eyepieces, and especially as you rack the focuser out more, the more heavier it gets. And what I found was the scope really kind of started, it really started kind of getting out of balance. Not that it was an issue, you know, I didn't overload a motor or, you know, slip a clutch or anything, but it was just, I was kind of worried about, you know, it getting overweight. And then of course when I go to change out, you know, putting a lot of that tension on my clutches and stuff, and I don't want to break a motor or burn a clutch, just because they don't make this stuff anymore. That's our downfall with the LXD75s, is these things are not made anymore. So the point I was going to make is that with the scope in the mount, you've got your rings in here, and you've got these two upper mount parts that you can put a finder scope or whatever on. And I ended up taking, and I found that when I aligned the focuser with these two bosses up here where you can mount a finder scope to, the weight actually was a lot easier to keep in a manageable range, because your weight isn't off-sided left or right, so it doesn't make the and I'll just show you really quickly. Like when we've got the scope this way, let's just say we got the scope almost straight up in the air. Okay, my focuser, hopefully you can see, is still in line, because here's the center line of the scope, which is where the weights are. My focuser weight, as I add a focuser or change out a focuser or add the camera or you know, add in my feathering rings, as I add things on or even just move the travel of my focuser, the mirror is not taking the bulk of the weight. My counterweights are. And in some cases that's true, even if it's off-sided to one side or the other. The counterweight still hold the balance of, you know, when I put a camera on here, I'm adding a pound, or let's just say, you know, I'm gonna have to adjust my counterweights for that. But the thing I noticed is, if my focuser's on the left side of the scope, then guess what? The left side of this scope is really heavy, and it, just because of gravity, is pulling down to where if my focuser was on the right side of the scope, gravity's pulling it right, it's right heavy. It wants to swing this way and level out, and swing that way and level out. And then you also can get into where, you know, you get all these different scenarios. It just depends on where you turn it as to how the weight reacts to it. The more weight you put on, the more it reacts. So it's balancing. That's why we're calling it balancing. So, you know, there are some things you got to take into consideration. And I found that if the focuser is just in line with the counterweights, you know, and I can pretty well view it. I'm about 6 foot tall. I can pretty well view this thing anywhere it slews to, you know, except for when I start looking at things way down on the horizon. At this angle, with the focuser in line, I can pretty well view anything. And if I need to go get a step stool, I'll go get a step stool. That ain't no big deal. But when I start getting this thing off to the left or to the right and turn this thing, I noticed it starts getting really kind of out of whack as far as balance goes. I'm just going to slack it off here. And you can see it's, you know, there you go. I mean, that's pretty well balanced. And I'll show you real quick. You can see, like, I can view, when the scope starts getting way over, like this way, like right there is about the hardest, that's the highest pinnacle of where the focuser is, and you can see it's way up above me. You know, I'd have to have just a little two-step step stool to get up there and look into it. But I found that a lot of the times the scope's going to be oriented this way. It's going to be off one side or the other, and of course as it tracks it. I'm going completely the opposite way. As it tracks it, you know, it slews to right declination like this. But you know, typically things are going this way because we're faced to the north, so you know, it just kind of depends. But even, you know, you can see I'm pretty low in the horizon, tracking something way off over that way with where the focuser is, and I'm still close. I can almost stand on my tippy toes and see it, and that's what the focuser racked about halfway out. So, you know, like I said, it's more preference, I think, than it is anything. But I found that making life a little easier as far as balancing goes, having that focuser right over the center line of the counterweights really helps out, especially as we start adding on, you know, changing out eyepieces and adding on cameras and everything else. The other thing I was going to show you was is I'm going to take, and I'm going to load this thing down. I'm going to take my 28mm feathering ring, screw that on there. I'm going to take the 14mm feathering ring, I'm going to screw that on there. Then I'm going to take my Sony Nexon 5 camera adapter, and I'm going to screw that on there, and you can see, and of course I'm going to put my front cell elements on there, so you can now just get an idea. There you go. There's your beer can. The universal scale of measurement. It's by beer can. That eyepiece at the large end of it to the very end of it is just as tall as a beer can and almost just about as big around. Plus I got this big old heavy Fudox camera adapter on here, which is substantially heavy, and then this is where the camera will go, is on here, and I'm going to slide all that in here, and I'm going to lock it in, and then you can see we start getting front end heavy. However, it's not bad though. But now I'll put it back up here in straight position. I'm gonna extend this thing all the way out just to say. It's still not bad. It's a little heavier, but it's still well manageable by the motor. Now, the thing where it starts really getting precarious is as you can see, it's really starting to take over on the counterweights. So what I found is, and I'm going to hold the scope this way, is I've got full 3 fingers between my bottom 2 all the way down, and then my top 3rd one is I take just 3 fingers and stick in there and I slide this thing up, and I know I'm good as far as just an eyepiece with my feathering rings. Now, I found out from playing with it earlier that when I take this, use 1 finger, slide it down to where it's tight on my finger, clamp it down. Now, the thing you got to remember is I don't have that camera that you're looking at me through on here, but you can see that's just a little quick, easy way to remembering your balancing spots. And that was kind of the nice thing. Now we're still a little front nose heavy, but as you can see, it's not bad. Even with the camera on there, it's not very you know, nose heavy as far as that goes. However, I did change the balance point from mirror heavy to front heavy, so you know, as this thing changes, you know, the play in it may change some, but I pretty well got all the play out of the gearing, so I'm pretty curious to see how it's going to work out. The other thing I did, and I don't know that y'all can see it, I'll see if I can zoom in. You can see it. You can see it good enough. Anyway, I took my Sharpie and I made a black line right here on this ring and a black line on this ring, and I wrote what size eyepiece. Of course, I'm using my 17mm, but I wrote 17 mil here and here on my scope tube. If you don't want to write on your scope tube, I understand that. You can get a little piece of, I don't know, tape or something will work. But I just wrote it on the scope tube. And now I know exactly where I need to have my tube slid up and down this way to have my 17mm in, even with the camera on there. And I wish I could show you with the camera on there. I didn't think about that when I started this, but even with the camera on here, I'm still within a balance point that is not overly heavy on the motors and clutches. So that's why I marked it right here. I kind of had to play with it and find a good sweet spot with a range, and that's why I marked it, you know, 17 mil. Now when I get my 8mm, I don't think the weight's going to really be all that different as far as that goes. So I may just have, you know, 17 and 8mm on those marks. If I get some more eyepieces, some bigger eyepieces or whatever, as I find that it changes as I change the tube, I'll mark accordingly on the side there. And you really, if you're not really even looking, you don't really even see it. But it is kind of nice on the white tube. You can write on there and you'd be able to read it pretty well at night without a whole lot of light. So anyway, that was me playing with the balancing, and I encourage you guys to play with the balancing and figure out some things and make yourself one of these scope holding rings. Because I really got a chance to really see the importance of having this tonight. Because as things change and we get some more eyepieces, you know, I can move this, and I'm going to make some lines here as well to where I can set that. The one thing I'm not too keen about is the fact of the reason I put this on here was to be able to turn the scope in the rings to put the focuser at an optimal eye level to be able to view through and everything else. It's not really much of an issue now, considering the camera has a flip screen. I can see the flip screen, or I can look at it on my cell phone from whatever angle, because I don't even have to be out there. So really the eyepiece for visual observing, you know, that may come into play. But like I said, at this point, just a $20 step stool, and I can get up here and I can look through and see whatever I want to see, no matter where the scope is. So, but it is nice having that on there. I'm spoiled with, now that it's been on there and I've got it on there. I'm spoiled with having that on there, and I really like that. I hope you guys have too. But anyway, that's it. I haven't had the chance to try out the AstroZap Dew Shield yet. I need to stick that on here, and I'm gonna do a little more checking with the balancing. It's just getting kind of late and I haven't had a chance to do it yet, but you know, it may be a little tweak here or there. Shouldn't be much though. So anyway, till next time.